Hey, here's a quick question. What's the opposite of dilution? Kind of like you ever taken some like red or blue dye and dropped it into a gallon of water, and then after a few seconds it vanishes. You know the red dye is still in there, but you can't see it anymore. What's the opposite of dilution? We could say concentration. We could also say recollection. Before something is scattered, we're going to recollect it. Kind of like you scattered your marbles all over the floor. Nobody uses marbles anymore, though, do they? That's even too old for me. Recollection is an interesting word where you're gathering stuff back. That would be concentration. Interestingly enough, and this, of course, is something that's said by atheists and nihilists. And by the way, when I make reference to atheism, I'm actually not talking about God or the lack thereof. Genuine atheism, you could look this up, it's called metaphysical atheism. Metaphysical atheism is that there's a sock puppet but no hand underneath it. It's a denial of ontological subjects, such as the soul, the absolute. I don't care if you use the word God or not, it doesn't make any difference to me what people believe, but, nihil ex nihilo, from nothing comes nothing. So the opposite of dilution would be concentration, or recollecting things back, right? Of course, it'd be kind of hard to pull the dye out of the water, but what if the dye were not subject to evaporation or melting or whatnot? You know how they used to talk about finding a needle in a haystack? Yeah, this video, by the way, is about anamnesis, or retroduction. It's not only the methodology, it's also, too, the process of uncovering the nature of things that are not objectively knowable. You stick it underneath the microscope, you can hold it in your hand. What about things that you can't stick underneath the microscope, things that you can't hold into your hand? Subject precedes object of negation. Subject is always precedent to anything, either said, declared, or denied. And people like nihilists and materialists and atheists, they think, well, metaphysics is just like some sort of New Age, illogical, that's not scientific, which I find extremely funny. The entire scientific methodology vis-a-vis the Pythagoreans, the Platonists, and the Neoplatonists, is hyperlogical. These are the people that actually founded the scientific method. So I find it kind of odd that the people that were teaching this are the very people that gave them their so-called science. Of course, today's science is used like someone would use a word in a religion or a belief system. Science! Where's the science? That's not the meaning of the word techne or science. Anyway, let's get to recollection, or anamnesis, smriti rasati. And we're not talking about recollecting what you actually had to eat yesterday. How would you find a needle in a haystack? We have induction, deduction, abduction, we have retroduction. I remember when I was young, they did these mental tests of the children, all these little silly tests to test children. And there was this big square out in the courtyard. It was really huge, and they told the children to measure all the lengths of the square and determine how many feet the whole thing was around the square. And I measured one length, and then I stopped. And all the other kids kept measuring around the square. And the teacher said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, it's a square. I only need to measure one and multiply it times 4. I wasn't trying to make a point with that one. Well, I was. Talking about recollecting that which we don't know due to primordial agnosis. What is the reason? I said region? What is the reason? I'll edit that out of this video. What's the reason for dilution? Why do we need concentration? Suvimutta chittasanabandham. The thoroughly liberated chitta means nirvana. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga, or union with the Absolute, is the ending, nirodha, of spiritual or noetic chitta perturbations, vritti. Manifestation is perturbation. The reason for embodiment is due to primordial agnosis. Of course, if you're a creationist, you believe in original sin or prima causa. As far as emanationism, whatever people believe in, doesn't make any difference to me. Vis-a-vis the Advaita Vedantists, the principal Upanishads, original Buddhism, on and on and on. The emanationists vis-a-vis Pythagoras, Proclus, Numenius, Syrianus, Iamblichus, Damasius, on and on and on and on. I.e., emanationism is primordial agnosis, dilution. kind of like light and illumination, which of course I've talked about endlessly, the extrinsic attribute for manifestation. Apophaticism, the via negativa. The notion that so-called mysticism, and of course, what do people mean when they say mysticism? If you actually go to the metaphysics section of a bookstore, I don't know how you'll feel about me from saying this, but it's all a bunch of New Age stuff, and I'm not against New Age per se. I mean, even Walter Russell coined the term New Age, supposedly the founder of... and Walter Russell actually is hyperlogical. Everybody should actually download, and I digitized that work, The Universal One by Walter Russell. But anyway, when you go to the New Age, the metaphysics section of a bookstore, it's all New Age. It's not actual metaphysics. So it's interesting today, and of course it tells you a lot about society when you go to the metaphysics section of a bookstore. There's actually nothing there about metaphysics. But this Anamnesis, this Smriti methodology, this Apophaticism, which is negation, neti, the most repeated phrase in ancient Pali, I've been translating Pali now for over 24 years, is Isakaya namisata, which equals anatta. Isakaya namisata means this body, i.e. the psychophysical, is not the soul, which of course equals anatta. And I'm not trying to talk about Buddhism here, but if Buddhism were super logical, it would never say this is not the soul, that's not the soul, this isn't the soul, that's not the soul. It would say, Paulus, there's no soul. There's no such passage. Not in any translation. You would never point out that which is not the soul. If there was no soul, you'd say there's no soul. What about it? No, there's no soul. What about it? No, there's no soul. There is nothing like that. There's 576 occurrences of the word anatta within original Buddhism, and the term Buddhism, of course, is a relatively modern creation. It was originally called Brahmayana, or Path of the Absolute, but I'm not interested in talking about Buddhism. I'm talking about Apophaticism, this via negativa. The term anatta, and pointing out that which is not the soul, is the via negativa methodology of concentration, recollecting. And it's interesting, the word recollection. Recollection, i.e. sati or smriti, i.e. anamnesis, recollecting that which you cannot know. Through objective negation, think about this. And you should think about it while taking a shower, while doing your business in the bathroom, while eating. Negation of objective phenomena leads to subjective synthesis. Theurgy, transcendence, is objective negation. Subject always precedes the object of negation. How do we find the needle in the haystack once again? You know, you can go picking through the haystack, but in the case of a metal needle, you'd simply light a match and set fire to the whole thing, and psh, right there in an instant, lay the needle. The needle is made out of metal, the hay is made out of hay, of course. The only thing that's left is the needle. The word, and I can't stand the word meditation. I hate it because it actually doesn't mean, I don't literally mean I hate it, but I do hate it. It doesn't point to anything specific. But what about meditation? It's like, I'll never use that word. Why? Don't you do it? I say, no, the word is aspecific. You can look it up, any definition of the word meditation. You can refer to 10,000 things. Sitting on the toilet, staring at the holes in the ceiling of your bathroom is technically the word meditation. The Neoplatonists, the original Buddhists, those who followed the monistic methodologies of both the Greeks and the Indians and the Egyptians and others, they taught retroduction, objective negation leading to subjective synthesis. The very word that people today apply to the word meditation. By the way, the word Zen, Japanese word, comes from the Chinese word channa. The Chinese word channa comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana, and that antecedent to the Sanskrit is the Pali word jhana. So you got jhana, dhyana, channa, and Zen. So those people that actually practice Zen are actually not practicing jhana, but we're not interested in arguing that. But the word jhana, or the word that people, specifically try to use in reference to meditation, means to burn. It comes from the word jayati, which means to burn. But burning what? You're burning away objectivity, leaving subjective synthesis. I tell people over and over again, well, how do you do this synthesis practice? How do you do this theurgic practice? And even right there in the Pali, no matter how good the translation is, and I'm obviously partial to my own translation, you actually have to have a leap, because I tell people over and over again, you can't think your way out of a thinking box. It's completely impossible. Thinking, i.e. mana in the Pali, it can't be done, because that is a perturbation. You're actually burning the wood between the ears and your head. You can't get there from here. You can't think your way out of a thinking box. The retroductive synthesis and methodology, which is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, or Suvimutta Chittasana Nibbana, the thoroughly liberated Chitta, or Nous, or Spiritus Sanctum, means Nirvana, Bhava Nirodha Nibbana. The subjugation of becoming means Nirvana. Well, what is the basis for becoming? Well, the basis of becoming is primordial agnosis. Well, how do you get, when you're talking about the diluted red dye in the water, how do you concentrate it or recollect it? You get there through the methodology of the negative methodology of Apophaticism. This word goes by many different terms in theology and original monistic metaphysics, both Greek and Apophaticism, neti, via negativa, Anamnesis, which just means recollection, but not conventional recollection like what did I eat yesterday. We're talking about recollecting, gathering up the marbles once again. You're putting things in a pile. You're concentrating it. Identification is the disembodiment of that which you see yourself as falsely so and therein so suffer. The methodology synthesis, i.e. theurgy or anamnesis, is extraction. But extraction cannot be objectively known. There is no objective way of pointing to the ontological and transcendent self. It is through objective negation. But it is not mental negation, like, well, that's not my soul and that's not my soul. You actually have to engage in a theurgic practice of disobjectification. The root word of that horrible word that I absolutely despise, meditation, comes from the ancient Pali word jayati, which means to burn. Well, what are you burning? You're burning away all objectivity, leaving the pure subject, because the pure subject cannot be burned, it cannot be destroyed. It is the transcendent principle of principles. Yes, it is that which you truly are. As the old Sanskrit saying goes, tat tvamasi, meaning that thou art. With that with a capital T, meaning Brahman, or the absolute, i.e. the agathon. The transcendent principle, objective negation, leads to subjective synthesis. Well, what is negated? All objectivity. But you're not negating it in a existential, empirical, mental cogitation sense of processing both consciousness and mentation, i.e. thought. Once again, you can't think your way out of a thinking box. Phenomena are, of course, the unreal. Well, what therefore is rest? Rest is ultimately, of course, transcendence. We're talking about homeostasis. You obviously can't spell homeostasis without the word home. The old Dhammapada passage goes, broken is the ridgepole. The ridgepole is the basis for the house. When you break the ridgepole, the whole house collapses. Well, the ridgepole for existential existence, and existential, literally, i.e. existence, means existence, which means to be outside of yourself. When you're outside of yourself, you are objectified, you are embodied, just like the signal in the radio, which of course is not in the radio. It is the consubstantial tuning of the signal and the broadcast thereof, which is analogous to consubstantial consciousness. Consubstantial means it requires more than one thing to exist, and it has a beginning in time. Anything that has a beginning in time, of course, has an end in time. So, all space, all matter, all phenomena. Of course, matter is unreal. Volume is unreal. Space, as I've said specifically, and this is 100% undeniable, is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, is the negative image of infinity. It's the negative image of the ether, or of pure energy. People always think energy is like a nuclear explosion. You're like, look at that energy. That's the impotency of energy. True energy would be that softball-sized lump of fissionable plutonium. That would actually be true potential. People always see things upside down and backwards. Every ancient metaphysical culture has always said that. Human being, and hence, of course, we have the inverted tree of the absolute, where the roots are in the heavens, and of course the fruits of the tree, the leaves and the fruits, are down here on earth. You could find that both by the Greeks and the Indians and the Egyptians, by the way. So, objectivity, that which the self is not. You really need to read some books on negative theology. I mean, you see here talk for hours and hours on the nature of synthesis and theurgy. But what is Apophaticism? That's the via negativa that is both the methodology for understanding the nature of transcendent principles, because they cannot be objectively known. Metaphysics is not something different than physics. Well, we got physics. I have heard this so many thousands of times by ignorant, unintelligent people. There's physics here. You're talking about metaphysics. It's just like a bunch of, religious mumbo-jumbo and New Age garbage. It's like, it's ridiculous. To think that is true is as stupid as thinking, well, this is physics and that's metaphysics. No, this is dealing with objective reality, and this is dealing with transcendent ontology. They're both the same thing, just like the coin. There's not a head side of a coin and a tail side of a coin. There's the coinage. You know, if it's a silver coin or a gold coin, or of course we don't use silver and gold coins anymore, really. There's not a north pole and a south pole of a magnet either. What we actually have is the three-dimensional force vector of the dielectric and loss of energy or inertia, which is manifesting the toroidal geometry of magnetism itself, which creates space. That's what fascinates everybody about a magnet, which of course, as I've said before many countless times in thousands of videos, is not quantitative, rather qualitative. What a magnet is before it becomes technically a magnet is quantitatively 100% identical. It is now a point source object with an ab extra field, which fascinates people. Wow, there's a field around this object. It's ab extra to the object. Wow, fascinating. We could make AC generators out of it. We could do everything now has a magnet in it. You know, TVs, computers, cell phones, everything. Everything's got a magnet in it. All technology does. Try to ask one scientist what a magnet is, or how a magnet works, or what is magnetism. And they'll inevitably talk about magnetic attraction, and magnetic attraction does not exist at all. It's an accurate observation with a completely inaccurate conclusion and summation, because descriptions are not explanations. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. There's no such thing as gravity. There's no such thing as time. Well, since us human beings conventionally swim in a sea in time and we judge everything by time, we of course think time is real. Time is completely unreal. Space is unreal also. The Poincaré disk model of projective geometry states that explicitly. Have you ever taught that about the Poincaré disk model of projective geometry in high school or college? Nope. Neither was I, though, so. But I knew all my teachers were wrong and foolish and uneducated, unilluminated and unintelligent. And I went seeking, and it's like, why would I listen to these people? I'm going to go to the library, and I'm very quick at weeding out the good stuff from the bad stuff, way quicker than anybody else that I've ever known. It's like, why would I listen to these people? I'm going to go straight to the masters. You know, very, very helpful. That's something I suggest for everybody. And you have to have a thirst to know and understand. You have to. Without it, why? You know, you can't get there by asking other people. You have to have a thirst and a desire to know. And I don't mean desire in a crude sense of desire. There is kusala and akusala, wholesome and unwholesome desires, even in ancient Pali. All desires are akusala, unwholesome. But there is one desire that is wholesome, kusala, and that is the desire to know and to transcend. I don't know if the word desire is appropriate, but it's still used as the word desire both in Sanskrit and Pali. Bhava nirodha nibbana. The subjugation of becoming means nirvana. You should ask yourself regarding transcendence, since you can't think your way out of a thinking box, what is a signal without modulation, has no frequency or no wavelength amplitude, whereby which any radio on Earth can only tune it if there's modulation? How would you tune a signal with no modulation? It wouldn't be a signal at all. It would literally be the plane of inertia. It would be nowhere to be found. It has no spatio-temporal footprint. It is undisturbed. The most famous words in Pali and Sanskrit via countless religious texts, Upanishads, Advaita Vedanta, on and on and on, Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Bhava Nirodha Nibbana, and Suvimutta Chittasana is no different, ultimately, than saying the signal without modulation is free, it is untunable. The ancient Pali passage goes of the truly wise and transcendent person at the death of the body, where the body falls away. Is that Mara, of course, is in reference to the evil one, basically the Pali text equivalent of the devil. Mara looked everywhere for him. It's talking about this ascetic who died, who was truly transcendent. Couldn't find him, looked everywhere, high and low, heavens and hell, here and there, hither and thither. It's completely untraceable, nowhere to be found, i.e. to be entrapped. That's a passage from the Majjhima Nikaya and also to Digha Nikaya number 2. There's no different fundamental using, modern analogy and talking about a signal with no modulation, which then, of course, really wouldn't be a signal at all, would it? That's all these mean. You don't have to know Pali or Sanskrit to have a clear, concise understanding of what they're actually saying. bhava, becoming, vritti, perturbations, the subjugation of, through wisdom and transcendence, i.e. through theurgy and objective negation, not objective negation. Well, I know that's not my soul and that's not my soul. You know, that's trying to think your way out of a thinking box. That is not theurgy, that's not Apophaticism, that's not transcendence. It is not recollecting, it is not concentrating. Meditation is concentration. But what people do when they hear that, it's like, well, I'm going to concentrate on something. And they're just burning the fires between their ears, trying to think their way out of a thinking box. And I don't get it. I just concentrated so hard and I didn't experience anything and become anyone. It's like, what were you doing? Let's concentrate really hard. I could tell what they were doing, even though you can't see it. They're trying to think their way out of a thinking box, and you can't get there from here. There is a reason why, in this video that I should call, Introduction to Apophaticism, or to the Via Negativa methodology of Retroduction, is not only the methodology for the reason, and is the lost secret of the Pythagoreans, the Platonists, and Neoplatonists, the methodology for if you have read Plotinus and Syrianus and Damasius and some of the Chaldean oracles and the great masters of the Greeks and Indians, how do these people figure this stuff out? It's an ancient lost methodology of retroduction. But it is not only the methodology for understanding the nature of these transcendent principles, which cannot be objectively known, it is also, too, the means and the vehicle of transcendence itself, i.e. of theurgy. This is not my opinion, this is a hardcore fact. It is simple, it is divine, it is beautiful, and the only thing that pisses me off about it is that nobody on YouTube is talking about it. There's essentially no books about it. There's one called The Unknown God by Deirdre Carabine. Even then, it doesn't get into the methodology. It just talks about negative theology of, like books from like Meister Eckhart, The Metaphysics, The Cloud of Unknowing, Pseudo-Dionysius, which is good, and it's good for you to read that stuff. I've told everybody they need to download or buy a copy of The Metaphysics. Yes? Everybody that's read that was like, oh my God, this book was really tough, but I started reading it. Man, I'm just so much smarter now. I can think more clearly now. I wished I'd read this earlier in my life. Thank you, Mr. Fat, bald, tattooed man, so much. This book has changed my life. It's difficult to read, but man, my mind is like Jedi. I've heard that comment hundreds of times in comments and email. I recommend you read The Metaphysics. It's not the only book. Definitely not the only book, but that's the only thing that pisses me off about retroduction. Nobody knows what are you talking about? What, you just made up word retroduction? Like, what? No. I'm sorry you never learned about that. I wasn't taught that in school or college either. It's insanely important. It's the way by which to know things, and also, too, the methodology of transcendence itself. It goes by many different names. Negative theology, Apophaticism, via negativa, neti. All one and the same thing. And this methodology is genuine metaphysics. It has been lost in the sands of time. The last time it was used really at all was in the 1600s. And the only reason those people were using it is because they were reading sources like Proclus, Plotinus, Iamblichus, Syrianus, sources like those. So, it doesn't have to die, but it essentially is dead. It's kind of like those Star Wars movies. Not that I'm a fan of Star Wars movies. Like, Jedis, this is like a dead religion or something. It does. Like, no, there's still a couple of us around there, We think they all died, but that's really what Apophaticism is. It's kind of like one Star Wars movie, I forget which one. It's like, Jedis, they died out a long time ago. It's like, there's still a couple of them out there. I feel like the Jedi of Apophaticism. Because there's nobody on YouTube talking about this. There's no book on this. There's a reason why I'm writing a booklet on this now, eventually to be a full-fledged book. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope I didn't babble on too much. Lux Everetus.